What do you think is harder? Climbing Mount Everest, running the world's toughest ultramarathon through the Badlands, swimming the Dover Channel, swimming with sharks without a cage, starting a YouTube channel, or trying to get an independent film made in Hollywood? It's hard to say. I would say that they're equally difficult, but some of the things that I've listed you can practice and try at. But getting a film made in Hollywood is almost part magic and part luck because you need so many things to come together, right? You need to get the right actor attached, you need to get financing and distribution, and this could be an almost impossible goal. So these are the 5 steps it takes to get a film made in Hollywood. And I will go through each step in detail to talk about the magic and the luck that sometimes has to happen for a film to be made in Hollywood these days. I say 5 steps for an independent film. If you're at a studio, I would say 4 steps because the financing and distribution is already taken care of, right? At a studio, you have a green light process where they run models and projections to see if a film will make money. Now, those projections are not always perfect because you can have all of the elements in place, but a film will still flop, right? We've certainly seen it in the headlines. When I first joined Disney, the first film that released was John Carter, and that was a huge loss for Disney. They ended up having to write hundreds of millions of dollars off. But once the projections and the models look good, a studio will green light the film. So step 2 kind of goes away when you're at a studio. We're talking about independent film. Independent films are made by production companies, small ones, mini majors. There are ones like Miramax and Skydance and Lionsgate that have to go sometimes find financing on their own, or they have financing and they have to find someone to distribute it. Perhaps they'll sell it to a studio, perhaps they will, have independent distribution with the domestic theaters, and then they would have to pre-sell the foreign rights for the rest of the world. So that's what an independent film looks like. So step 1 to getting a film made in Hollywood is you have to get the rights in order. I always tell my executives, show me the rights. Who owns the rights? Where are the rights? And you would be surprised. Sometimes we don't know the answer to that. Another producer might bring us a project that they're attached to, and we will ask them to have an option to the script, and they might say yes, or they might say, oh no, we just have a handshake with the writer. There's nothing in writing, which always stresses me out and kind of pisses me off, because if you're going to bring a project to a company asking for financing or distribution, they better have the rights in order. So an option to a script is basically a deposit, right? So you say to the writer, I'm gonna pay you, $5, $10, $15,000. It can, for a very hot project, it could go 50, 100,000. Usually it's in the tens of thousands, right? So we'll say to a writer, we want to give you $10,000 for an option on your script for 12, 18, 24 months. And during that time, we have an exclusive right to shop it around and to find financing for it and potentially make it. And they will say, okay. And we will also ask for an option extension, which allows us to extend the option if we haven't attached talent to it or found financing or a way to distribute it. And then within that option purchase agreement will be a purchase price. So the purchase price is usually about 2% of the budget. And this can wildly vary, right? It could be 100,000, 200,000, $1 million, $2 million. I've seen a wide range for a purchase price, and that purchase price is usually paid upon principal photography starting. So we usually pay it a little bit before principal starting to make sure that we actually have the rights to the script before we start shooting. Now, when we talk about rights, what does that mean? So it could be 1 step, it's the rights to a script. Sometimes it's 2 steps. If it's based on a book, you have to get the rights to the book, and then you have to get the rights to the script. On Black Flies, we had to go out to the book author, get the rights for the book, and go to the screenwriter and get the rights to the script. And we also had subsequent writers who came in to do rewrites. And so there could be many option purchase agreements or writing agreements for a project. For a script, it could be a new script that a writer wrote, usually using an original idea, or he goes out and gets the rights from the book author to write the script as an adaptation. There are scripts that have been around for a long time. For example, Gemini Man. So for Gemini Man, it had been languishing at Disney for 20 years. So at Skydance, we wanted to make it, so I had to go back to Disney to acquire the rights. And that was kind of ironic because I had to negotiate for the rights with the BA that I used to report to at Disney. And I will tell you, it was a very painful, extensive, long process because the attorneys at Disney are super smart and very meticulous and very thorough. So it took me probably almost a year to extract the rights from Disney, but we did end up making it. Ang Lee directed it and Will Smith starred in it. There are films like Black Flies that have been around for a long time. I think at one point, Mel Gibson had been attached to it to play Sean Penn's role. Step 2 to getting a film made is finding the financing / distribution. Now, this is probably the most difficult step because you have to find someone who's willing to finance it, who runs their their own models and projections and who believes in the project. And this ties in very closely with step 3, which is finding an actor or director who is a big enough name that the financier will run models and projections, or potentially even pre-sale at the foreign markets to see if this film will do well. So different ways to finance a film. You can find private investors. You can find perhaps a private equity fund that will fund it. You could sell to a studio who will allow you as the production company to make the film. They will give you the money and then they will end up distributing it. You can also sell to a streamer like Netflix, Apple, Hulu, Amazon, and they will agree to also finance your production and then distribute it. Now, as part of the financing distribution deal, you might have to carve out a request to streamers like Netflix that, so this film needs to have limited run in the theaters so that it can qualify for the Academy Awards. And that usually is very important to directors and actors of a certain caliber. They will probably even request that that's part of their agreement, that we have to get a limited theatrical run so that they can qualify for awards. Step 3, like I said, you need to get a director or actor attached who believes in the project. Now, it's usually always based on the script, right? The script has to be good enough for usually a director or actor to be attached to it. Once you have that, then you can usually get an actor. Once you have a director, let's say, which is what happened on Black Flies. Jean Stéphane is a very acclaimed and respected director in France, and Sean Penn loves him. So once Sean heard that Jean Stéphane was attached, he felt comfortable enough to come on the project. It's like a domino effect, right? Once people heard Sean Penn was going to be in the film, then it allows us to get other talent to come on board. Step 4 is pre-production, right? That's getting the production underway. Usually we have to find locations, right? And as I said in my short video, there are certain states and countries that have best tax incentives. That means, for example, we could have a film that costs $10 million, but if a state like Georgia is willing to give you $2 million back, that's where we're going to film. So in the United States, the states that have the best tax incentives and rebates are Georgia, Louisiana, New Mexico, and Ohio. And internationally, the countries that have the best tax incentives are the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Lots of productions in Canada. The next step, right, in pre-production is usually hiring the production legal, and that's very important for me. I have to have a great firm that is brought on to basically take care of all the paperwork, right? I take care of all the deals as the business affairs executive, so I negotiate all the deals, right? So I negotiated, Jean Stéphane and Sean Penn's deal and Ty Sheridan, and then the production legal makes sure that they go through rounds and rounds and rounds of redrafts before that agreement is signed, that we can start principal photography. Like I said in my past video, places like Disney will not allow you to start rolling cameras unless all of the agreements are signed, which is very stressful. But if you don't, that means we don't own the rights, and so they don't allow the cameras to roll, and basically it means the crew is standing around and it costs us about $100,000 a day. So you better get those agreements signed. Now, at other places, independent production companies, it's not as strict, but for me, I make that a rule on my productions that everything has to be signed, because if it's not signed, they have no incentive to sign it after the fact. If the film is done or if they've been paid, what's their incentive to get it signed? If we don't have it signed before production starts, I always make sure that before we release the last installment of their compensation, that the agreement is signed. So next, we have to make sure, after all the talent agreements are done and signed, we have to make sure that we complete our signatory paperwork with all the guilds and unions. And this is very important. This is why I call them the Mafia, because if we don't do what they say, then they can really cut us off at the knees. For instance, SAG-AFTRA can call their actors and say, oh no, you can't start working. This production doesn't have their signatory paperwork in place. And then, like I said, we go back to having the crew standing around costing us hundreds of thousands of dollars because they have been told by their guild to not start working. So we always have to make sure that the guild signatory paperwork is complete before production starts and they clear us, right? We need to get that clearance from SAG, DGA, WGA, Teamsters to make sure that we're ready to go. Then we have to hire the crew, right? We have department heads that we have to hire. We have to hire the DP, the line producer, the accountant, the costume designer, the casting director. Casting director usually comes first because we have to cast the film. And then there are the people underneath them. There's lighting, there are drivers. We have to get trailers. We have to get the caterer. I mean, the list is too long for me to list out, but basically when I say hire crew, that could mean hundreds of moving steps. Step 5 is starting principal photography. That means we fly the actors out. We have to get their Perq packages in place. place, right? And I always joke that I am an overqualified travel agent because I always comes down to what is their air travel? What class of air travel? What does their trailer look like? What are their accommodations? You know, ground transportation, who their drivers are if they rise to that level. There are some actors who require private jets, so I have to figure that out. I've become quite an expert at things like air travel and private jets. And sometimes I've had to tell actors, you do not get a G5 because we don't have money in the budget. We have to now in this brave new world get COVID testing in place, right? Most productions nowadays are you have to be vaccinated and we have to have daily COVID testing. We have to, you know, make sure we have security in place on top of the crew. We have to make sure that production goes smoothly. And I will tell you, I've lost count of the times I get calls over the weekend saying, oh yes, so-and-so actor is unhappy because of X, Y, and Z. So we need you to call his attorney because you have such a great relationship with him. And please ask him to not walk off set and to please show up on Monday. I will say that most of my job is being really good with people. I think this is where my coaching training has really helped and elevated my ability to connect with people. And I would say that's my favorite part of my job, being able to connect with people and finding out what's the most important thing to them, right? I always say to the talent reps, like, what's the most important thing to your client? And I will make sure that happens. After production wraps, which is always a miracle and we're always so grateful. You know, I've gone to many a wrap party and then the director will take a couple weeks off and then he'll go into post. And usually we should have the first cut by 12 weeks in. The DGA gives the basic requirement is that the director gets a 1 cut, 1 preview. Sometimes directors will get 2 cuts or 2 previews. Now, some directors will ask for final cut, which we as studios and production companies always push back at, and they should never have it because there are only a handful of directors who rise to that level. And, you know, off the top of my head, I would say probably Steven Spielberg, Ron Howard, Martin Scorsese, maybe J.J. Abrams now. But when a lower level or new director asks for final cut, we always say no. But I will say that final cut is always a slippery slope because directors treat their films like their babies, right? They never want to cut it down. And then, you know, 3 to 6 months later, after the film has wrapped, you might see it in the theaters or you might see it on a streaming service. And for me, it's always amazing to see my name in the credits. Do you have the courage to bring forth the treasures that are hidden within you? It's so powerful, right? Because it really implies that we all have treasures within us. And whether or not we release it or share it with the world is up to us to decide, right? I think for a lot of people, it never gets revealed to the world because we're afraid, because we have imposter syndrome. We think, well, you know, people have done it better than us. Who am I to think that I could create anything? Who would be interested in what I have to create? Which, by the way, I think all the time. And she goes on to say, the hunt to discover those jewels, that's creative living. The courage to go on the hunt in the first place, that's what separates a mundane existence from a more enchanted one. The often surprising result of the hunt, that's what I call big magic. And I will tell you, every day I'm thinking about how to put together my video, right? Like how to tell my story, how to push through when I want to stop. That's part of the big magic. And I am so grateful and so happy to get the chance to be creative and put something out into the world. Whether it's create some kind of value for my audience is for you is to be seen, right? Am I trying to educate? Am I trying to entertain? Am I sharing my life's journey? Am I sharing my life as a working mom, working in Hollywood as an attorney? I'm trying to do it all, but I also want to maybe make it easier for those of you who are young, who are going to law school or thinking about law school, maybe thinking about becoming a mom, maybe you're wanting to go back to the workforce. One of my biggest goals of creating my channel was to help other working moms not feel like a failure, because I constantly feel like a failure, like I'm failing my kids because I work so much. And I have to realize that my parents, they gave us the greatest gift of work ethic, right? Is working and never giving up. I'm so glad you're with me on this journey. This is Tyler. Remember, you're one thought away from joy.